talked about some of the names, but it's very appropriate.
Yeah, the study overlaps.
Okay.
We have drumming this week that we'll have to get from.
Yes. Second and fourth.
Oh, I don't, oh, I shut mine down. I don't know if I can get to the end of that with my Bluetooth. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure you were on. Perfect.
Oh, today's, where are we?
Second
Oh,
and fourth.
so we're here.
Oh, no, how come?
Oh, good. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Oh, good.
yeah,
Good.
I sometimes.
There's something
Nice
Hello.
about it.
I always have to say it's like
I do love coffee. Yes, I think
Oh, no.
she said that. So I give the two. Yeah.
I can listen to it.
Oh, so you're having something coming
And I
with
will
it?
hear
Yeah.
and I'm fascinated.
Okay. Well, if you think of anything you want us to get, to you, let me know. All right. Thank you. You too. Oh, perfect. Perfect. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Excellent. All right, bye.
Oh,
Oh,
oh my.
wow.
This is my daughter, Eve.
Yeah.
Oh, this is your daughter?
Yeah.
We had her, I think, last time. Yeah.
Nice, great.
Or you need a screen to talk into.
Oh, are we being filmed?
It's reverse. I'm on your left, but here I come in on your right. Weird.
Technology, it's incredible. Yeah.
Look at this. Put my hand. You're on the other side. You're on.
No.
You got your arm is right there. This week.
Oh, wow.
Second and fourth. Okay. That's what I was told. Good. Looking forward to it.
So it was worth coming, right?
How many years ago?
2001 around there. Wow.
Used to have our 24 years ago.
My son is here, a year older than I was, like he's
Came to
37.
my house.
No, he's a year older than
Worked for my mother.
Celia's.
I
He's
could come over
34. Celia's 34.
It became a
They were
So I have the mini group. And I put some things out, not much.
thing. I put out, well, newspapers.
So whose turn is it to talk?
What happened was,
Testing. Is this okay? Is this? Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for showing up today. I appreciate it. This is our third and final session on a sordid but fascinating subject.
And I hope we've been coming back on a different subject.
But I want to make a point before anything else. Today I want to talk about Jewish gangs in other cities throughout America at that time. And I want to focus on Boston. I want to talk about Murder Incorporated. You can't possibly talk about the rise of Jewish gangsters in America without talking about Murder Incorporated. And then I want to focus on the two most infamous and culturally iconic Jewish gangsters. That's Benjamin Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky. But the point I want to make before anything else is a personal reflection regarding the subject at hand, and that is the fact that my native city is New York City. I came of age in New York, and my grandparents on both sides, maternal and paternal, came from Europe, Ukraine, Austria, Hungary, and Poland, and settled in the Lower East Side. My father was born in 1909, 116 years ago. Unbelievable. Grew up in urban immigrant poverty. Slept in the kitchen with his brother Jack. Had one pair of trousers, so worn and full of holes that he was ashamed to go to school. And yet, within 18 years, he became the first person in his family to go to college. Got a free education at CCNY. And then even more amazingly, went on to Tufts Dental School. Opened his dental practice at the height of the Depression in 1934 in Washington Heights, Upper Manhattan, 180th Street and Broadway. And it was tough times, as you can imagine. And they often went without food. But within time, my father's practice flourished. And I personally grew up in solid middle-class comfort in a lovely suburban home on a suburban street in Teaneck, New Jersey. Why do I share this personal history with you? My contention is that my parents' experience was more reflective of the American Jewish experience in America than the rise of Jewish gangsters. So I don't want to get or give the impression that Jewish gangsterism was a predominant mode within the Jewish communities of northern cities. But as I try to point out in the opening session, the story of Jewish gangsters should be told. Jewish gangsters were as much a part of the community as the saints and the scholars and the students and the yeshiva bookers and the dedicated social workers. And their impact, as I think I've been implying, on our culture, certainly popular culture, and our very way of life was pretty profound. So I just want to make that distinction. Let's turn now to other cities. How many of you are from cities outside of Boston? Most of you. Wow. Wow. You're from New Jersey, Atlantic City. Yeah.
Brooklyn,
You're from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Where?
East Flatbush.
Uh-huh.
Why are you from
Oh,
Brooklyn?
that's the
No,
real
no.
deal, Flatbush.
No, I
What's
was,
that?
Flatbush is the real deal.
East Flatbush.
Dodgers. And you go back to cookies.
well, Williamsburg was the very seat of Murder Incorporated. I was born in the Bronx. Not that I lived there very
This is
long.
the Bronx.
You're from the Bronx. I think, did we mention?
I'm not sure.
I was born on the southeast corner of 176th Street in the Grand Concourse. I'm a bit older than you. I'm just curious, who else? Yeah, Bayonne.
Bayonne, New Jersey.
Right.
Flatbush and Crown Heights.
Okay, all right. Did you know each other?
Yes, they do. Born in Manhattan
Where?
at the Women's Hospital. My parents, that's why I'm moving. My parents lived right next to the Salvation Army.
I'm sorry?
Right next to the Salvation Army, what was it, Jerome Avenue?
On Jerome Avenue.
Oh.
Yeah.
Way back when.
Yankee
And then
Stadium.
Right,
and then we
right.
moved to Bayside.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
I
Yeah.
remember getting corned beef
Ossining,
sandwich.
New York, in Westchester County.
Ossining.
Sing Sing.
Uh-huh.
Only thing.
And
And I'm from Lakewood, New Jersey, basically.
that's right, Bob, yeah, yeah.
I consider myself a New Yorker, basically.
Well, I never acknowledge that I grew up in New Jersey. People ask me where I'm from. I'm from New York City. And the fact is, I used to hang out in Washington Heights throughout my entire coming of age years. Washington Heights in those days was the community of German Jewish refugees. And many of my father's patients were refugees from Hitler's Europe.
What time would this be like?
1934, he retired in 1964. Yeah,
So I'm just saying, German Jews allowed in the States.
right. There were significant. Henry Kissinger
Right.
came to Washington Heights. I grew up there. The fact is that what we see in the Lower East Side can be replicated in other Jew towns throughout northern cities. The incredible concentration of Jews in certain areas, beginning in 1881 with the assassination of Tsar Alexander II and the outburst of pogroms that sent my grandparents here, and I'm sure yours as well. 2 million Jews came out of the Pale of Settlement. Most came to the United States. A handful went to Palestine and established the beginning of the Yishuv, which evolved ultimately into the state of Israel. Chicago's West Side, 200,000 Jews. Very similar to the Lower East Side, the tenement buildings, the rickety buildings, the crowded streets, the rag pickers and the junk dealers, the petty hoodlums. The settlement houses, notice that Jane Addams' historic Hull House was located in the very crowded Jewish section of Chicago. And around the Jewish community were all these other ethnic communities, the Irish, the Italian, the German, the French, and the Greeks. Washington Heights, when I was growing up, was Germans and Greeks. That's where I got my cinematic education, because Washington Heights, between 181st Street, had 4 movie theaters: the Gem, the Empress, and the Lane, and the RKO Coliseum. And on Audubon Avenue, where my grandmother lived, was a theater called the Heights Theater that showed nothing but foreign films. And I grew up just gorging myself on foreign films from the time I was probably 12 onward. Now, the Jewish West Side area of Chicago was infamous for being a den of thievery and crime. The ward was the 20th Ward. It was known as the Bloody 20th. The main street was Maxwell Street, named as Bloody Maxwell. And let me just quote a 1908 police report. From Maxwell came some of the world's worst murderers, if not actually the worst that Chicago had ever seen. From Maxwell came the smoothest robbers, burglars, and thieves of all kinds. From Maxwell came the worst tough gangs. Philadelphia, Southeast wards. Cleveland, anybody from Cleveland? The Woodland section, noisy, crowded, very dangerous. In Boston, you have, of course, Chelsea. And when there was that fire in Chelsea that burned so much of the area, the emphasis shifted to Dorchester, across the Mystic River. And all those rickety tenement buildings just went up in flames. So they moved to Dorchester. Same rickety buildings, the same swarming waterfront. Detroit, slum-ridden East Side, the Hastings area south of Grand Boulevard became a center of crime and violence. And in Newark's 3rd Ward, you have some of the toughest Jewish sections of any northern city. So Cleveland, Chicago, Newark, Detroit, Philadelphia, these were the hotbeds of Jewish organized street crime. An interesting question, and I don't have an answer to this because very, very little research has actually been done. Why not Pittsburgh? And why not Baltimore? Each city had 50,000 Jews, but they didn't develop the notorious underworld that these other cities that I've mentioned. And in order to do a research project on what really developed a Jewish underworld of note, would have to take into consideration a lot of factors. The density of population, the relationship between the Jews and other ethnic communities, the relationship between Eastern European Jews and the settled and assimilated German Jews, the density of the population, the virulence of anti-Semitism, the nature of industry and business in the ghetto. And of course, the inexplicable. How did certain people rise up out of this swarming mass to become, I don't know how to find the language to describe this, gifted gangsters, highly effective gangsters, individuals with unusual, quite extraordinary powers of organization, of brutality, of ruthlessness, of smarts. An FBI agent said of Meyer Lansing, he could have been chairman of the board of General Motors had he chosen to go into a legitimate business. So these are sort of unanswered questions, and a lot of research still has to be done on this topic. I'm just skimming the surface. Okay, so who were these gifted or talented or effective or highly successful Jewish gangsters? The most notorious gang outside of Lower East Side was the Purple Gang in Detroit. I don't know if you've heard of this. The Purple Gang from the Hastings Street quarter, known as Little Jerusalem. And they were led by Harry and Louis Fleischer, 2 brothers, by Joe and Ben Bernstein, by Samuel Sammy Purple Cohen, and it was gambling and extortion and loan sharking and prostitution. Cleveland, the Woodland Ghetto, led by Louis Rothkopf, Morris Kleinman, Mo Dalitz, who became very well known from the Kefauver hearings, Sam Tucker. Minneapolis, very small Jewish population in the southeast side of Minneapolis, but they developed an incredibly potent gangster operation led by Isidore Blumenfeld, known as Kid Khan, and Yiddy and Harry Bloom, the most successful bootleggers in Minneapolis, which was close to Lake Erie, close to Canada, close to doing business with the Bronfman family. St. Paul, Minnesota, Leon Gleckman and his boys. Kansas City, Missouri, Solomon, cut your head off, Weissman. Boston, we'll go into this in a little more detail in a moment, but Charles King Solomon, Joe Lindsay, Norman Fox, Louis Fox, and the Hyman brothers. And what's really interesting about Boston, and this I know for a fact, someone like Joe Lindsay, who was an infamous bootlegger along with King Solomon, ultimately became a very noted philanthropist. Gave generously to Brandeis University, was national chairperson of the Brandeis Athletic Committee, went down in Brandeis's Hall of Fame. Joe Lindsay was a major contributor to CJP, the Combined Jewish Philanthropies. And when he died, I don't know who the rabbi was, but it was a very illustrious rabbi who performed the ceremony. Newark, New Jersey, Samuel Reinfeld, and of course, Abner Longy Zwillman. Philadelphia, Max Boo Hoff, Harry Stromberg, known also as Nig Rosen, Willie Weisberg, Max Chinky Rothman, Samuel Cappy Hoffman, Joseph Little Kersey Herman. Now, Chicago is an interesting case. You had a very, very tough Jewish gang from the 20th Ward, led by Benjamin Buddy Jacobson and his brother, Samuel the Greener Jacobson, and two other brothers, Herschel and Max Miller. There was also Max Eisen and Isidore Nig Goldberg and David Edelman and Samuel Nails Morton. They were tough, they were brutal, they were well organized, but they were no match for the more powerful Irish gang, led by Diane O'Banion and Bugs Moran, and a man named Jaime Weiss, who was not Jewish. Jaime Weiss was a Polish Catholic. Jaime Weiss was acknowledged as the only man that Al Capone feared. The only man that Al Capone feared. By the way, Legs Diamond, many people think he was Jewish. He was not Jewish. He was Irish, part of the New York Irish mob. And the Irish, as powerful and effective as they were no match for the Italians, led first by Johnny Torrio. And after Johnny Torrio survived 7 bullets in an ambush, handed the whole operation over to his protege, Al Capone, and he comfortably retired with all of his millions. Capone implemented the St. Valentine's Day massacre and arranged the assassination of Diane O'Banion, thereby literally destroying the Irish threat to Capone's operation in Chicago and then later Cicero. The Jews understood the situation quite clearly, and they arranged to submit to the Italians. And you have the phenomenon of Al Capone's absolutely chief, most trusted aide, Jacob Greasy Thumb Guzik, a Jew. Let's turn to Boston for a moment. Now, to really understand organized crime in Boston, you have to really understand the Italian and the Irish communities, and in particular, the Winter Hill Gang in Somerville, led by Howard Winter. No connection. And that Irish-Italian feud, I didn't live here. This was back in the 50s. Some of you perhaps remember all this. That feud was really virulent, and it went on for a long time. And it's recorded that over 50 people were murdered during the Italian-Irish feud. The Winter Hill Gang was considered the second most powerful criminal organization in New England. The first, Providence, Rhode Island, the Patriarca family. So you had a kind of quasi-merger between the Winter Hill Gang and the Patriarca family gang, with Samuel the Rifleman Flemmy acting as liaison. So you have these known Boston gangsters, Irish and Italian, James Buddy McLean, these names ring any bell? John the Executioner Marorano, Howard Winter, James, of course, Whitey Bulger, Joseph the Mac McDonald, Patrick Ney, Kevin Weeks, who wrote a whole book, and Stephen the Rifleman Flemmy. You have Francis Cadillac Frank Salemme, and the most frightening gangster of all, Joseph the Animal Barbosa. This was all taking place in the 50s and the 60s. How conscious of this you were, I don't know. Now, the key Jewish gangster in Boston, without any doubt, was Charles King Solomon, who controlled bootlegging and extensive business operations during the Prohibition era. He emigrated to America from Ukraine as a boy, and he and his three brothers really grew up in middle-class comfort, similar to Elmer Rothstein, whom he discussed once before. But by the age of 20, he got very much into fencing and prostitution and bail bonding. And then when Prohibition came, he became extremely powerful and very successful. He controlled the majority of illegal gambling and narcotics before expanding to bootlegging during the Prohibition, which began in 1920. He owned a number of businesses, including the Coconut Grove nightclub, but he did not own it when the horrible fire broke out in 1942. Almost 500 people were burned to death. At that time, the Coconut Grove was owned by a Jew named Bernie Wolanski with mafia ties. What's interesting about King Solomon was that he was very connected nationwide to the National Crime Syndicate. Who's from Atlantic City? Jim. There was that famous meeting in Atlantic City, which really formed the nucleus of the National Crime Syndicate. King Solomon was there. He was known to federal agents as the Al Capone of the East. He met his death on June 24th, 1933. He went to the men's room at the Cotton Club on Tremont Street. And there he was assaulted by two Irish hoodlums who were his rivals. We know their names, James Burke and James Coyne. They shot him. He staggered out of the men's room and cried out, and it sounds just like James Cagney, right, in Public Enemy. This became part of popular culture. He shouts out, "They're dirty rats, they got me." His empire was divided up by his associates, Joe Lindsay, Hyman Abrams, and the brothers Louis and Max Fox. At the time of his death, Solomon was 46 years old, and he lived on Fuller Street, 183 Fuller Street, right near Coolidge Corner. At the wake, which was held in his home, 3,000 spectators gathered at Abbotsford Road and Fuller Street. I lived in Brookline for many years. It was a massive crowd made up of reporters and lawyers and observers and actresses and people fascinated with the whole sordid glamour of gangsterism. And you had these petty hoods with their right hands in their right pockets, and they had one word to any reporter who came up to them to ask a question: scram. Solomon was buried at the Hand in Hand Jewish Cemetery in West Roxbury, 500 people in attendance. The other notable Jewish gangster of the Boston era was Harry J. Doc Sagansky. Name ring a bell? Considered one of the city's largest bookmaking operators during the 1950s. He's also the oldest known American mafia associate to serve time in a federal prison. He was 91 years old. Like my father, Sagansky came out of urban immigrant poverty, went to Tufts Dental School, became a dentist, opened his office in Scully Square, in a liquor store, above a liquor store that also served, it was a covert bootlegging operation. He died comfortably at the age of 99 at Faulkner Hospital.
He was also
Pardon?
he was also a philanthropist.
So Sagansky obviously supported the Beth Israel Hospital. He supported Tufts Dental School, needless to say. And he was one of the earliest and one of the most significant contributors to Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. At the Kefauver hearings, 1950 and 51, Kefauver said that Sagansky's gambling operation was the largest racket kingdom in existence in the city of Boston.
Was he practicing Gangsters while?
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I had dinner with a friend of ours at our house on the Cape. And the woman said, I have a friend who remembers going to a dentist, but who was very involved in gambling and racketeering. I said, probably Doc Sagansky. Oh, that's it. That's it. Yeah,
He was
Doc-
a very good dancer.
yeah. He was.
Let me tell you something.
Sagansky lived on Gardner Road. Those of you who know Brooklyn, 183 Gardner Road, near his mentor and friend, King Solomon, who lived very close to Coolidge Corner. So let's turn to Murder Incorporated. Scary subject. And let me lay out the details. Brooklyn-based. Remember that Siegel was born and raised in Williamsburg, you know. This was the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. And they didn't call themselves Murder Incorporated. That was a name dubbed onto them by journalists. But it was originally created by Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky under Luciano's grip on the mafia after the Castelli-Maresi wars that we talked about earlier. It ultimately came under the very, very strict, ruthless leadership of Louis Lepke Buchholter and his associate Jacob Gura Shapiro and their top Italian associate, Albert Anastasia, known as the Lord Executioner. Now, these are scary people, really scary people. And Murder Incorporated, which was a combination of Jewish and Italian cutthroats and killers, literally cast a wave of terror across America from 1935 to 1941. And the estimate, nobody knows how many people were killed, nobody. But the estimate is at least 1,000 people murdered by orders of the mob bosses to be located anywhere in the country. The reason why nobody knows how many is because the murder was carried out by paid assassins who would travel to a small town somewhere in the Midwest, and they would kill their target and disappear back east. So there were no witnesses, there was no motive, there was no evidence, which we'll get to in just a moment. So I know it sounds inconceivable, but hundreds, if not thousands, were actually killed. What happened, by the way, with the end of Prohibition in 1933, almost as soon as Roosevelt took office? Remember Roosevelt's theme song?
Happy days.
Happy days are here again. So the ending of Prohibition was really part of the New Deal, to get people feeling a little better about the horrible situation with the Depression. And what happened when Prohibition ended was that racketeering began. And what do we mean by racketeering? Gangsters with vision, like Buchholter and Shapiro, moved into labor. And they started taking over through sheer brutality and muscle, one labor union after another. We're talking not just Teamsters, we're talking painters, we're talking bricklayers, we're talking longshoremen, we're talking motion picture projectionist. I know it sounds incredible, but Buchholter, with his subordinate, Willie Byoff, almost took over Hollywood. They almost controlled the Hollywood film industry by controlling the motion picture projectionist union and other strategic unions. They had the power to literally shut down a major studio like MGM or Paramount or Universal or RKO at a moment's
The
notice.
studios were owned by Jews also.
Pardon?
The studios were owned by Jews. Louis Lumiere.
Their associations are subtle but probable connections. And when I was growing up in Teaneck, I don't know about you, but we had milk delivered, and we had bakery goods delivered, like Eve's nice delivery of these, yeah. And Dugan's was the bakery deliverer. Even as a boy of 12 or 13, I knew that Dugan's was mafia controlled. They controlled dry cleaners and laundromats and restaurants and poultry and fish and bakery deliveries and all kinds of construction trades. I'm telling you, the influence, the impact into our very daily lives by the organized crime syndicate of the United States was profound. And most people, even if they had a vague notion, shrug their shoulders. What are you going to do? It's up to the government to fight something so massive. This went on for 6 years, Murder Incorporated. And the most feared of all the mob bosses was Buchholter. Buchholter, like Arnold Rothstein, was unpretentious, non-ostentatious, didn't wear any kind of fancy jewelry or clothes, lived modestly in a suburban ranch house, spoke softly, but he was terrifying. And his word was law. And if you put out a hit on somebody, that somebody was dead sooner or later. Pardon?
Where did he live in that suburban house? Where was he?
Oh, at one point he lived in Fort Lee, where I lived for a few years. Teaneck is, you have Fort Lee, across the George Washington Bridge, you have Englewood, and then you have Teaneck, and then Hackensack. Yeah. So these were all local people. John Gotti lived in ordinary neighborhood, along with a lot of other suburban dwellers. It is estimated that Buchholter and, by the way, Gura Shapiro, how did he get the name Gura? When he got annoyed at somebody, he would say, "Get out of here." And it sounded like Gura. Get out of here, get out of here. Forget about it. It's estimated that they had an organization of 250 men. Accountants, influence peddlers, the connection to the political world, the connection to the world of legal resources, influence peddling, and of course, killing. I know this sounds absolutely incredible, but I present this as a fact. Each man, Buchholter and Shapiro, made between $1 and $5 million every year in the 1930s, when a $50 a week salary for a public school teacher was considered quite comfortable. I just read, by the way, that $100,000 in 1942, worth today $2 million. We'll get to this also in a minute. However, Thomas Dewey was relentless, became special prosecutor, ultimately governor of New York and presidential candidate, and he was relentless. And Buchholter and Shapiro panicked, and they ordered a wave of killing throughout the country of any conceivable person who might be an informant, who might somehow jeopardize their major operation. And their stable of killers included mostly Jews, like Herschel or Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. Again, I know it sounds inconceivable, but this one man who went to the chair is alleged to have killed at least 100 people. The possibility is that he killed as many as 500 people. Nobody knows, because they would do this on a weekly. It's like you going to your office, and working your 8-hour day. That's what they did for a living. They killed people. So you had Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, you had Motel or Marty Bugsy Goldstein, Albert Tick-Tock Tannenbaum, Abraham Kid Twist Reles, R-E-L-E-S, Abraham Pretty Levine, Irving Knadels Nitzberg. And here's how it worked. Here's how Murder Incorporated worked and why it was so effective. You had a finger man, and his job was to stake out the victim, all the victim's whereabouts, movements, habits, and he would point out the victim to the killers.
Larry, what was Relis's first name? That's a name I heard as a kid in Brooklyn. What was Relis's first name? You mentioned Relis.
Abraham. We'll get to Relis in a moment, because it was Relis single-handedly that brought down Murder Incorporated. Not because of his own volition, but because he cracked under pressure. Then you had the wheelmen, who would either steal a car or provide a car that would bring the killers to their destination. And then you have the evaporator. He's the skilled person responsible to get rid of the car and any other conceivable incriminating evidence. Remember the film Pulp Fiction? Right? Harvey Keitel plays the evaporator. They call him in to clean up the mess. And then, of course, you have the killers, who got between $100 and $250 a week, and they're at the top of this operational hierarchy. They would go on an assignment. They'd carry a little black bag with their tools, a rope, ice pick, which was one of their favorite weapons. And the reason why we don't know about a lot of the victims is because they would ram an ice pick right through the ear directly into the brain. And a lot of the deaths were attributed to cerebral hemorrhage. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy. How many of you are familiar with Ernest Hemingway's most famous short story, The Killers? If you haven't read it, you must read it. This is one of the great short stories of American literature. And it's pure Hemingway. And it's a story of two killers who come to this small town somewhere in the Midwest. And they enter this diner where Nick Adams, Hemingway's surrogate, is talking with his friends. And these are two strange men that don't look at all like they're from a local habitat. And they're there to kill a targeted victim, a prize fighter named Swede, who had somehow crossed the mob. And one of them is Jewish. Hemingway makes one of them Jewish. It's a story about the presence of pure evil and its impact upon the innocence of Nick Adams. Brilliant story. It all came to an end when Dewey's anti-crime operation singled out Abe Relis. Now, Abe Relis, pure psychopath, so vicious and unbridled in his brutality that he scared the hell out of his fellow hitmen. He's known to have killed a parking lot attendant for not bringing his car fast enough. He liked burying people alive. He was really, really vicious. He's brought in for questioning. They have all kinds of evidence against him. His wife pleads with him to cooperate with the government because he was facing execution and he knew it. And he starts opening up, totally cracks under federal pressure. Now, fortunately for the government, Abe Reles had literally a photographic memory. And he filled hundreds of pages, hundreds of exquisite, intricate detail concerning the entire operation of Murder Incorporated and the workings of even the people at the highest level. And his testimony sent some of the biggest kingpins to the electric chair, including Buchalter. Buchalter was the only reigning mob boss to go to the chair. Also electrocuted was Louis Capone, Mendy Weiss. Remember Mendy Weiss? He was one of the two killers sent to rub out Dutch Schultz. Frank Abbinando, Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, Irving Knadels Nitzberg, and Bugsy Goldstein, who happened to be Relis's boyhood friend. Gura Shapiro somehow escaped execution. He was sentenced to life in Sing Sing, and he died in prison. Now, Abe Reles, you can imagine, was guarded day and night by 5 armed police officers. But somehow, mysteriously, he fell to his death from the 6th floor of the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island on November 12th, 1941. All 5 cops claimed they had all been taking a nap at the same time. Again, I want to make it clear that there's a lot of gangland folklore that is not backed up by historical evidence. You don't know what to believe. But they somehow convinced the authorities that Abe Reles tried to escape by hanging a sheet wrapped around the windowsill of the 6th floor of the Half Moon Hotel, and he was going to climb down onto a low terrace and make his escape, which is ridiculous because Abe Reles was desperate for police protection. Were he to be found in any kind of escape, the mob would not only execute him, but they would do it in an indescribably horrible way. Again, folklore implies that either Frank Costello or Albert Anastasia offered $100,000 to any policeman who was guarding Reles to get rid of him. Again, $100,000 would be equivalent to $2 million today. So Abe Reles's body is found 6 floors down. The 5 cops who were guarding him were demoted, and that's all that ever happened. And the death has been unresolved ever since. But that was the end of Murder Incorporated. Let me just conclude with a talk about the 2 most illustrious and notorious gangsters in American Jewish history. And that's Benjamin Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky. Boyhood friends, probably from the age of 12. And those of you maybe who have seen Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, this is the story of Lansky and Siegel. They palled up with Lucky Luciano, and they really stood right at the head of the national crime syndicate. Siegel was born in Williamsburg, Jewish Ukrainian parents. As a youth, he formed his own protection racket with Mo Sedway, who became also famous later on. And he would terrorize pushcart owners if they refused to pay $1 for protection. When he was like 13 or 14 years old, he was referred to by terrified Jewish business people and pushcart owners on the Lower East Side as wilde chaya, a wild animal. he got friendly with Luciano, interestingly. We'll get to this later with Lansky. Now, in 1937, well, 31 was the Castellammarese War. Siegel was one of the 4 hitmen who killed Joe Masseria. Remember that, right? And after that, he rose to the top ranks of the Italian Jewish mob. 1937, at the height of the racketeering era, the East Mob sent Siegel to California to develop gambling opportunities. The mob wanted to expand their revenue. He goes out to California and he recruits Mickey Cohen, who was the Jewish head of the West Coast mob. Now, at 23, Bugsy Siegel married Elsa Krakauer, who was the sister of Whitey Krakauer, a Jewish hitman. But he wasn't a very faithful husband. Bugsy Siegel was 6 feet tall, very handsome, and incredibly charming. And he had affairs with a multitude of women, including well-known actresses at the time, including Wendy Barry, Marie the Body McDonald, and Hollywood socialite Dorothy DeFrasso, an American woman who married into a very, very illustrious Italian noble family. Later, of course, everybody's familiar with his relationship with Virginia Hill, and it was in Virginia Hill's house in Beverly Hills where he was assassinated. Now, with the aid of Dorothy DeFrasso, who knew everybody and who had a passionate affair with Gary Cooper, at that time, the #1 movie star in the world, through Dorothy DeGrasso and his boyhood friend, the actor George Raft, Siegel wends his way into the very innards of the Hollywood literati, the Hollywood glitterati. He buys a swanky home in Beverly Hills and starts palling around with some of the most illustrious people in Hollywood. Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, Clark Gable, Randolph Scott, Katharine Hepburn. I mean, it was endless. He was, again, this weird thing about gangsters. They have this kind of compelling, admittedly sordid, but utterly alluring glamour. This takes some kind of psychological insight that I currently lack. He became famous, as I think you know, by buying and developing the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. And he was a visionary. He was an incredible visionary. And he sees this empty desert, the only state where gambling was really legal. And he sees the opportunity to create a gambling empire. And he convinces his associates to come up with $1.2 million to develop the Flamingo Hotel, which is a modest little hotel in the middle of the desert. They agree. But the 1.2 million budget balloons totally out of control into $6 million. And back east, the mob bosses are getting frustrated and angry. And after 1 year, there was no revenue coming in from the Flamingo Hotel. Everything was going wrong. The opening was washed out by a torrential rain. His extravagance knew no boundaries. The mob bosses want to kill him. Lansky, who was at the very top of the commission, begs his colleagues to give him another chance. These guys loved each other from the time they were 12 years old. And even though the Flamingo, at the start of 1947, showed $250,000 profit, the commission's decision was irrevocable. Bugsy Siegel was sitting on a sofa at Virginia Hill's house in Beverly Hills, reading a newspaper, 10 o'clock at night. A sniper outside the house, and this is really mysterious because this doesn't really fit in with a mob hit. A sniper outside the house, looking through the window with a high-powered rifle, fires 5 bullets directly into the seated Bugsy Siegel. I remember the newspaper the next day showing, I know this is awful, showing Bugsy Siegel's body with his left eye blown completely out of his head. And this was shown to readers all over the world. This sensationalism was very popular. Finally, let's talk for a moment about Meyer Lansky, who was the financial genius of organized crime. Again, he could have been chairman of the board of General Motors had he gone into legitimate businesses. He was born Meyer Susholinsky in Grodno, Poland, which is now part of Belarus, White Russia. Came to America with his family as a young boy. Meyer Lansky was small. He was only 5 feet 4 inches tall and very slight of build. But there was something about him that was utterly fearless, utterly tough. And the story is that a local Italian hood, a teenage hood named Charles Lucky Luciano, tried to shake down little Meyer Lansky for extortion money. And Lansky looked him right in the eye and told him to go to hell. And Luciano was very impressed. Really admired this kid's utter bravery, and they became very, very close friends for the rest of their lives. Along with Bugsy Siegel, who saved Meyer Lansky's life on more than one occasion. Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky formed a mob during the early days of Prohibition. And these two guys would ride shotgun on illegal liquor transport from the boat, to the dispensation point, casino, restaurants, clubs. Riding shotgun was incredibly dangerous because there were always hijackers, waiting to take your loot, take your product. And they were so tough that everybody feared mingling with them, competing with them. By 1936, Lansky had established a gambling empire in Florida and New Orleans, and particularly in Cuba. And he formed this incredible partnership with Fulgencio Batista, the dictator of Cuba. Batista was a total partner and associate in the illicit gambling empire that Lansky established. However, we all know what happened in 1959. Fidel Castro leads a revolution, ousts Batista, and nationalizes all the casinos and nightclubs, restaurants, and business enterprises of the mob. But it didn't stop Lansky. He then goes to Las Vegas and develops Las Vegas, fulfilling the dream of his friend, Meyer Lansky. Develops Las Vegas into the gambling mecca of the United States. Let me just talk for a moment about an incredible period in American social life. We're talking about the 1930s. Hitler comes to power in 1933. His influence affects significant numbers of Americans, particularly of German origin. And you had 100 anti-Semitic organizations in America during the 1930s. 100, over 100. The most successful was the American Nazi Bund and the Silver Shirts. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Silver Shirts. And they would have big convocations, big rallies. Let's not forget what happened on February 20th, 1939. 21,000 American Nazis gathered at Madison Square Garden, 34th Street in Manhattan. 21,000. Now, I know this sounds bizarre. You may not believe this, but a judge named Nathan Perlman and a distinguished rabbi named Samuel Wise approached Meyer Lansky And they said, we want you, if you're willing, to break up these Nazi rallies. We'll offer you money. Lansky says, no, no money. We're Jews. The Nazis are our enemy. We're going to do this pro bono. Nathan Perlman, Judge Perlman, and Rabbi Weiss said, there's one condition: don't kill anybody. Don't kill anybody. All right, we'll do our best. There was a particular rally in Yorkville, which was a German neighborhood in New York. And Lansky and 14 other associates go to the rally. And let me just quote Lansky. The stage was decorated with a swastika and a picture of Hitler. The speakers started ranting. There were only 15 of us, but we went into action. We threw some of them out the windows. Most of the Nazis panicked and ran away. We chased them and beat them up. We wanted to show them that Jews would not always sit back and accept insults. Now, during World War II, again, this is hidden history, but it's real. Lansky was instrumental in helping the Office of the Naval Intelligence Operation Underworld, in which the Naval Department recruited known criminals who they knew controlled the dockyards of New York. And what the federal government was so concerned about was Nazi saboteurs and subterfuge, which could really cripple the American war effort. Luciano, although in jail in Sing Sing for a 35-year term, still controlled all mob activities on the waterfront. They controlled everything that came into the port, everything that went out of the port. Lansky and his criminal associates did such a good job of monitoring possible Nazi subversion that Luciano was released from Sing Sing on the condition that he leave the country and go back to Naples. It's also important to know that Lansky was very instrumental in raising significant money and smuggling significant arms to the Jewish underground militant movement in Palestine during Israel's struggle for independence and statehood. The major reason why, and this is personal because I lived in Israel from 1970 to 1975, the reason why the Israeli government defied American pressure for 2 years, American pressure to extradite Lansky back to Miami, where he was to stand trial for tax evasion. And I didn't know much of this history at that time, but every day, you read the Jerusalem Post, and it was always about what's going to happen with Lansky, and is the government going to buckle, and why is he here in the first place? Finally, under very serious federal pressure, Golda Meir relents. Because, by the way, the right of return, I don't know if you've ever read the right of return. There's a clause. Anybody know the interesting little clause? If you're a criminal, it doesn't apply to you, okay? And that's the reason Mr. Lansky, you're a criminal, and therefore you don't really come under the jurisdiction of the law of return. Lansky reluctantly, because he was living in Herzliya, Pituach, hopefully forever to escape American law. He's deported back to the United States, stands trial in Miami, and is acquitted. Acquitted. He ends his life in Miami Beach at the age of 80, peacefully. He could be seen strolling along the waterfront, handing out candy and gifts to adoring kids. Dies of lung cancer, but dies in bed. His fortune was estimated, I know this sounds unbelievable, at $300 million. Now, we're going back 50 years. But somehow it all disappeared because at the time of his death, his official assets came to no more than $50,000. A fitting end, in a way, to my three-part presentation on Jewish gangsters. All right, today, finally, we don't have Jewish gangsters anymore. We have Jewish criminals, but they're white collar. These are financial geniuses who commit incredible manipulation and fraud. And we have Michael Milken and Ivan Borsky and Bernie Madoff, and more recently, Sam Bankman-Fried. We're talking billions of dollars of corruption and fraud and manipulation. Do Jewish gangs still exist? Yeah, in Israel. There are 16 official Jewish and Arab syndicate families operating in Israel. When I lived there, it was Moroccan. The Moroccans, they controlled, Moroccan Jews controlled the Israeli underworld. A few families were Egyptian. There was one family that was Iranian, all Jews, of course. And of course, the influence of the Russian mafia in America can be found in Brighton Beach, in Brooklyn. But that's a subject for an entirely different set of lectures. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Larry, can I ask a question?
Mm.
I'm sure others might have. So the image from Israel used to be that all the Jews in America flipped and just weren't strong men. They were just scared stiff of anti-Semites. They did nothing. But the case of the American Jewish gangsters proved that they were starkers.
Yeah.
Yiddish for, it's tough guys.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we made that point, Jim, before. This is crucial to understanding the weird allure, the weird glamour of Jewish gangsters. Book after, by the way, the subject was not that fully explored until about maybe 25 years ago. There's a book I really recommend. It's called The Rise and Fall of the American Jewish Gangster, and it's by a very important writer named Albert Fried, F-R-I-E-D. A very good book about the early stages of Jewish gangsters called Our Gang, by, I forgot the writer's name. Rich Cohen, I mentioned this before. Rich Cohen wrote a book called Tough Jews, in which he literally glamorizes and glorifies all these guys for the reason that Tug just suggested. I didn't like the book. I felt it was absurdly admiring of people who were really vicious, who were really psychopathic. Yes, but they also happen to be shtarkas and balagulas and gorillas and tough guys, rebutting that contemptible image that Jews have of being victims of anti-Semitism. Now, the subject, by the way, it's not too well known in Israel. Although there was a gang war, I'm not sure what year, that resulted in shootouts on Israeli streets in which innocent bystanders were killed. And then the Israeli government really moved in an anti-crime syndicate operation. Those of you who follow events in Israel know that the Israeli Arabs are very angry at the lack of governmental vehemence in combating terrible crime existing in the Arab Israeli communities. The Arabs feel the government is ignoring what for them is a terrible problem of organized crime. So when you think of popular culture, I mean, The Sopranos, The Godfather trilogy, Boardwalk Empire, which I did watch all 4 seasons. That gripped me somehow. And then over 100 Hollywood films. Bugsy Siegel has been portrayed by probably 15 different actors and 15. Meyer Lansky has had an entire film devoted to him. It was a TV film starring Richard Dreyfuss. But more recently, a very good friend of mine, Bob Rockaway, who wrote a very interesting book called But They Were Good to Their Mothers. He and I taught together at Tel Aviv University. He wrote a book that was pretty balanced, pretty fair-minded. So it's a rich, full, fascinating barrage of literature pouring out now. I still find it a bit mysterious, you know. I find it somewhat elusive in trying to grasp this incredible popularity and glamour associated with these gangsters. Yeah.
Just one follow-up.
Yep.
Were any of these guys observant Jews?
Well, Red Levine, whom I mentioned, you know, is one of the real cutthroat killers of Murder Incorporated. He was Orthodox. And if it were at all possible, he just wouldn't kill on Shabbat.
A motto to live by.
Yeah, you know, if circumstances demanded it, all right, but he made it really a pretty strict policy. Yeah,
I'm just wondering, did anybody here watch Peaky Blinders?
Yeah.
yeah.
The Jewish gangster?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, that's modeled
Is it?
on Monk Eastman. The first time we met, I talked about Monk Eastman.
Oh.
Monk Eastman was the first Jewish gang leader. He was the first person to develop petty thievery and pushcart theft, you know, and arson and horse poisoning. He was the first one to develop it into an organized crime mob. And they tried to kill him a multitude of times. He always survived. And then he joined the American Army during World War I, went over to France, fought heroically in the trenches. When he came back, the governor of New York restored his citizenship. But Monk, and by the way, Tom Hardy, who plays that image of Monk Eastman, talks about his wartime experience, right? Monk Eastman was finally assassinated at the age of 46.
In Britain.
No, in America, yeah. And I try to give the evolution of the original gangs the first time we met with Kid Twist, Sverbach, and then finally evolving into organized crime as we came to know it. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, Jessica.
Well, I wanted to ask, you know, as you mentioned before, that the Italian crime family it's still very much a family tradition. And in Jewish families, it's very much not.
Yeah.
And I always learned that it was because the Jewish mob families wanted their kids to be lawyers and dentists and go to school. Is that a fair idea?
This is a pretty, I gave the incident reported by David Reisman in his famous work, The Lonely Crowd. Gives the example, let me repeat it at the risk of boring people who've heard it before. Reisman gives the example of a son or a daughter of a Jewish family who wants to go to Stanford. They live in Brooklyn, and she wants to go to Stanford in California. And the parents say, oh, sweetheart, it's a long way off, very expensive. But if it's what you really want to fulfill your dreams and your individual aspirations, we're going to do it. Same situation in the Italian family. Mom, Pop, I really want to go to Stanford out in California. What? You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. Your family is here in Brooklyn. You're going to go to Brooklyn College and not Stanford. In other words, I can only conclude from this that the Jewish ethic is the fulfillment of your offspring. The Italian ethic is the absolute imperative of the family. The family comes first. You're part of the family. Your individuality is subsumed within the corporation we call the family. Different. Now, you also, this requires some real research. You have to go back into Italian history. You have to understand the origins of the mafia. Why did the mafia spring up, and why were they so acknowledged and almost embraced by the Italian people? You have to understand the history of Italy, which was not united until 1861. It's barely 100 years old. And Italy was always dominated by foreign powers, whether it was Spain or Austria-Hungary or... So law, the very notion of law, was not legitimate, but rather colonial. Law was colonialist. And to obey the law was to submit to colonialism. Now, the Jews had a very different experience. The Jews lived in a ghetto, surrounded by a wall blocking them off from the host communities. And within the Jewish ghetto, you had the rabbi, who was the dominant head of the community, and you had strict rules and regulations and the Torah. So it was like a separate world. And by the way, notice with the Age of Enlightenment, it produced terrible problems for the Jews. Oh, now there's Zionism, and now there's socialism, and now there's Marxism. To deviate Jewish fidelity to spirituality. I find this interesting. And when you try to understand the difference between the Italians and the Jews, you have to inquire. By the way, my other fascination is why the Italians are not the Irish. Why do the Jews fear the Irish more than they feared the Italians? And I didn't know this, but there is a tradition in Italian cultural and intellectual life of anti-clericalism. Not true in the Irish. Not true in the Irish. The priest, the archbishop, the cardinal were sacrosanct. Why did it take so long for the sex scandal to finally become clear and manifest? Because the priest was God, and the archbishop was God, and the cardinal was God. What difference does it make? It's a global structure from the local precinct to the Vatican. Why do you think Kennedy ran into such ferocious potential opposition when he ran for the presidency? We're going to have the Pope dictating American life. And it wasn't until Kennedy's brilliant and clarifying speech, assuring his fellow Americans that he'll be the leader and not the Pope.
I heard you say that the Italians don't have a history of anti-clericalism. Did I hear you correctly?
The Italian, there was I would have to explain, there was an intellectual movement, when, I'm not sure, of anti-clericalism in Italian cultural life. My suspicion is what you find in the Irish is defection. James Joyce, leaving Dublin. I can't live here. This is crazy. This country's nuts. Edna O'Brien, living in London, her literary life. Defectors from the oppressiveness of the church. So my suspicion is, and I have no clear data, my suspicion is that there is a clinical difference between Italian Catholicism and Irish Catholicism. I don't have research in front of me, but that's my suspicion. Yeah.
Were you aware that there was a major mafia hit by Frank Cadillac Salemi?
whose nephew lived across the street. And it was a major hit, like a couple miles from here at a pancake house.
Wow.
Yeah, that was within my lifetime.
Wow.
I can't remember when.
So
And
where did Salemi live?
I don't, Salemi's nephew lived across the street, and he was known to be in Melrose. And the nephew was
Wow.
quite well known because he was a big coach and things. He just passed away, by the way. And there was another major hit in I forget the name of the restaurant. It served
Nine,
muffins and coffee. It was in Medford Square. Pewter
Pewter
Pie,
Pie.
yes, yes. yes.
Pewter pie.
And they walked
Oh, I
in-
used to love
They
pewter pie.
walked in right there and shot him in midday.
Oh my, really?
And there was another major hit in Charlestown.
The 99.
Yes.
And that wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. Maybe
Like
the last
20 years ago.
20 years.
my company did a video for Discovery Channel
Yes.
that we used the hit up here as the basis of showing how police dealt with bullets. So we hired people to sit, we went into Boston and rented a coffee shop for the evening and hired guys who could fire fake guns. And we had a
Wow.
shootout, and the Boston police
Yeah.
gun department helped us, and then we went to the crime lab, and we
Wow.
hid a gun up by Mount Hood in the pond.
Yes.
Me and our children and friends of our children discovered the gun.
Oh, wow. And I think the hit in Medford Square was like midday, and this hitman came in, shot, and the Medford police said they were not in the whole area because they were known to have some connections.
The reason why syndicate hitmen could get away with almost any murder was because you have to have witnesses testify in order to convict. Those brave enough, willing to testify, would disappear and never found, or they would simply be murdered. And everybody knew this. So it's like Trump saying, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I could get away with it. So could they. They could literally kill, Abe Rellis could literally kill a parking lot attendant for not bringing his car fast enough. And nobody's gonna, I mean, there must have been witnesses. Must have been witnesses.
I'm gonna say.
Okay, yep.
On that, I think I'm gonna call it. It's,
Mm.
Thank
Thank you. I will-
you all so much for coming. If you miss any of the two
Farewell,
previous ones,
New Jersey.
the TBS
Who?
communication.
Farewell, New Jersey. Is
Has
that
the
near-
link to both
T-
of them. And we'll
Tina.
send out the link
I
to
say
this
it's
one as
Farewell,
well.
New
So if you have anybody who,
Farewell, is it near Tina?
Thank you
Oh,
again
yeah.
so much.
Did you ever go to Farewell?
I think I went to the High Y Theater,
Yes, just stick around.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Larry.
the High Y Theater. Do you remember the High Y Theater?
No.
In Fairlawn?
I was gonna ask you if you remember